You wake up one morning, stretch your arms, and for the first time in your life, something feels off. It's subtle at first, almost like a whisper at the edge of your awareness. You look in the mirror, and the face staring back at you feels familiar but strangely hollow, like a costume you've worn for so long that you forgot it wasn't really you. The smile, the style, the story you've told yourself and others, all of it suddenly feels paper thin, fragile, ready to tear. For years you defended this image. You worked hard to polish it, to make sure others saw you in the right light. Maybe you built your ego on being successful, or on being kind, or on being strong. Whatever the role was, it became second nature, so natural that you confused it with your true self. But then life, in its quiet, uncompromising way, begins to pull at the edges of that mask. A failure here, a rejection there, a sudden loss, or even just the stillness of awakening. Piece by piece, the disguise starts to slip. At first, panic sets in. You cling to the mask. You tell yourself, this is who I am. Without this, I'm nothing. The thought of losing it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no ground beneath you. It feels like death. And in a way, it is. The death of who you thought you were. The identity you've been protecting your whole life begins to crumble, and with it comes a wave of fear so deep it shakes you to your core. But here's the strange truth. What's crumbling isn't you. It's the false structure you've been carrying, the fragile character built out of other people's approval, out of achievements and roles and borrowed stories. What's being stripped away is not your essence, but your disguise. And though it feels brutal, even unbearable, something deeper inside you whispers, this was never you to begin with. This is the first taste of ego death, the moment when the ground of your old identity starts to dissolve. It doesn't feel spiritual. It doesn't feel blissful. It feels terrifying, raw, and disorienting. Yet beneath the fear lies an opening into something far more real, far more enduring than any mask could ever be. The more you look closely, the more you realize how fragile this thing called ego really is. One harsh word and it shatters. One failure and it collapses. One rejection and it whispers that you are worthless. Think about it. How many nights have you lost sleep replaying something someone said about you? How many times have you felt your stomach twist at the thought of being embarrassed in front of others? That was never your soul holding on. It was the ego, clutching at its image like a cracked mask that must never be dropped. The ego survives by comparison. It doesn't care if you come out better than or worse than. All it wants is a measurement, a story to cling to. I am this, I am that, I am important, I am not enough. And when life dares to question that story, when success fades, when a role crumbles, when a relationship ends, the ego trembles like glass about to break. To the ego, every crack feels like death. Imagine living in a house built entirely of glass walls. From the outside, it looks beautiful. Sunlight pours through. People admire it. But deep down, you know how easily it could all shatter. Every stone thrown, every storm rattling the frame reminds you how vulnerable it is. That's what living through the ego is like. It feels solid only because you've never questioned it. But the moment awakening shakes its foundations, you see the truth. The house was never safe. And so when the ego begins to slip away, your whole body reacts with panic. You've been taught to believe that without this fragile house, you'd have nowhere to live. Without the story, you'd have no identity. Without the mask, you'd disappear. That is why letting go feels like dying, because the only self you've ever known is dissolving. Yet what's really happening is not destruction, but revelation. When the glass shatters, the open sky appears. When the mask falls, the real face is revealed. Ego death is terrifying precisely because it strips away everything false at once. But beneath the fear, if you're willing to stay, you'll notice something extraordinary. The silence left behind doesn't erase you. It uncovers you. If you've ever wondered what ego death looks like in real life, you don't have to imagine some mystical lightning strike or dramatic spiritual vision. It slips into the ordinary, weaving itself into the everyday moments that break you open when you least expect it. Picture someone who has spent their entire life building an identity around achievement. They're the go-getter, the one who always has a plan, always chasing the next milestone. Their walls are covered with degrees, their shelves with trophies. Then one day, the career they've built collapses. Maybe the company shuts down, maybe they're laid off, or maybe they simply wake up and realize the work they've poured their soul into suddenly feels hollow. In that instant, the image of the successful one crumbles, and what's left is a frightening emptiness. They whisper to themselves, "If I'm not this, then who am I?" That's ego death. Or think of someone who has always been the nice person. Their entire sense of worth comes from keeping others happy, saying yes when they want to say no, smiling through exhaustion, being the peacemaker even when their own heart aches. But one day, the strain becomes unbearable. They can no longer force themselves to nod along. They finally say no. And instead of gratitude, people around them get angry. "You've changed," they're told, as though authenticity is betrayal. The ego role of the nice one shatters, and it feels like dying. Yet beneath that collapse, a more truthful self begins to breathe. Or imagine the strong one in the family, the one who never cries, who carries everyone else's weight. For years, their identity is built on appearing unshakable. But then life delivers a blow so heavy they fall apart. They sob, they tremble, they admit they can't hold it together anymore. And the ego screams, "This isn't me, I'm supposed to be strong." But in that raw vulnerability, something sacred happens. The mask of false strength dissolves, and real strength, the kind born from honesty, not pretense, emerges. These moments are terrifying because they strip away the only identity you've known. They feel like tiny deaths, each one tearing at the threads of your carefully woven mask. And yet, this is the strange gift of awakening. Every time a role crumbles, something deeper is revealed. Behind the achiever, behind the nice one, behind the strong one, there is a self that doesn't depend on performance, approval, or appearances. A self that simply is. That's how ego death shows up. Not always in monasteries or mountaintops, but in breakups, job losses, sleepless nights, and unexpected tears. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives disguised as endings. And though it feels like life is erasing you, what it's really doing is carving away the false so the real you can finally step forward. Here's the paradox of ego death. The very thing that terrifies you, letting go, is the only thing that will set you free. The ego whispers, "Without me, you'll disappear. Without me, you'll have no identity, no meaning, no life." And for most of your life, you believed it. You clung to roles, to titles, to relationships, thinking they defined you. But awakening reveals the opposite. The tighter you hold on, the more you suffer. The more you release, the lighter you become. Think of a person clutching a rope that's burning their hands. The more they grip, the deeper the wounds. Yet the fear of falling makes them hold on even tighter. That's what living through the ego feels like. You keep gripping the story of who you think you are, even as it tears you apart. But the moment you let go, you realize something astonishing. You don't crash into nothingness. You land in open space, in a freedom so vast, it makes you wonder why you ever clung so hard in the first place. We see this in everyday life. Someone loses their job, and at first they feel destroyed. But over time, a strange relief sets in, a sense that they are no longer trapped in a role that suffocated them. Or someone walks away from a toxic relationship and feels empty, but slowly that emptiness transforms into peace, into the quiet discovery that they were whole all along. Letting go always feels like death at first, but on the other side, it becomes rebirth. The paradox is that the ego equates letting go with annihilation, but your soul knows better. Your soul isn't afraid of endings because it sees beyond them. To the soul, failure isn't humiliation. It's just a wave passing through the ocean. Rejection isn't devastation. It's redirection. Death itself isn't destruction. It's transformation. The ego panics at every crack. The soul remains still, vast, untouched. And here's the freedom. When the ego dissolves, fear dissolves with it. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of failing, of being judged, of being left behind. All of these fears belong to the mask, not the one behind it. When the mask falls, fear falls too. What remains is presence, clear, quiet, unshakable. So yes, letting go feels like dying, but the death is only for the false. The more you allow it to crumble, the more space truth has to bloom. That's the paradox. What looks like loss from the outside is liberation on the inside. And once you taste that freedom, you begin to see that nothing real was ever lost. Perhaps the hardest part of ego death isn't the cracking of the mask itself, but what comes after, the emptiness. Once the roles have fallen away, once the stories no longer fit, you find yourself staring into a silence so vast it almost feels unbearable. Your old life has dissolved, but the new self hasn't yet appeared. You look in the mirror and whisper, "If I'm not who I thought I was, then who am I?" And the silence offers no immediate answer. This is the stage where many people turn back. The emptiness feels like a void, and the mind panics. It rushes to rebuild, to grab a new mask, to cling to a new identity. Some even build what's called a spiritual ego, a shinier mask that says, "Now I'm awakened, now I'm special." But the truth is, this is just the old game in a new disguise. The real test is whether you can resist the urge to fill the silence and instead sit with it, raw and unguarded. Imagine standing in an empty house after everything has been moved out. The furniture, the pictures, the decorations, all gone. At first, the space feels desolate, echoing with absence. But if you stand there long enough, something shifts. You begin to notice the light flooding in through the windows, the way the walls breathe with space, the potential for new life to unfold. That's what the emptiness after ego death is like. It feels like nothingness at first, but slowly you realize it's actually full of presence, full of possibility, full of you. It is uncomfortable, no doubt. Your body aches with restlessness. Your mind screams for distraction. You may feel disoriented, vulnerable, even lost. But this stage is sacred, because in the stillness you begin to sense what was always here but hidden, the awareness untouched by every story you've lived. The silence is not your enemy, it is your teacher. And here lies the strange beauty. What first feels like death transforms into rebirth. Sitting in the emptiness reveals that you don't need to become anyone new. You only need to stop clinging to who you're not. Beneath the layers of fear and identity, the real you has always been waiting, patient and unshaken. So when you find yourself floating in that void, don't run. Don't rush to rebuild. Let the emptiness breathe around you. Because the void is not a loss of meaning. It's the beginning of seeing life as it truly is. When the ego finally dissolves, you discover something astonishing. You were never the one who died. The false roles, the masks, the fragile stories, they vanish, yes. But beneath them, something timeless remains, untouched by every storm you've ever faced. What's left is not nothingness, it's presence, pure, steady, unshakable presence. Think of the sky after a violent storm. The thunder fades, the clouds break apart, and suddenly the vastness stretches endlessly above you. The storm never destroyed the sky. It only covered it for a while. That is what you realize when ego death has run its course. The storm was never you. The vastness was. In this state, fear loses its grip. Fear of rejection, failure, weakness, even death itself. All of it belongs to the ego. Your soul doesn't fear rejection because it knows it cannot be diminished. It doesn't fear failure because it sees every attempt as part of the unfolding. It doesn't fear endings because it knows it is eternal. When the ego dies, fear dies with it, and what remains is freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from achievement, approval, or control, but from simply being. But let's be honest, reaching this point is not easy. Most people never stay in the void long enough to see it. They rebuild, they cling, they create new masks because the silence feels unbearable. True ego death requires courage. The courage to stand in the emptiness without rushing to escape. The courage to let every false identity fall away until only truth is left. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop trying to become someone, you finally realize you already are. Not a role, not a title, not a story, just awareness itself, alive in this moment. The more the ego dissolves, the more life itself shines through you. Relationships feel lighter, work feels freer, and even the simplest act, breathing, walking, watching the sky, becomes sacred. So if you feel like you're losing yourself right now, remember this: what's dying isn't you. What's dying is everything you never were. The ground may feel like it's crumbling, but what's actually happening is the floor of illusion giving way to the foundation of truth. You're not losing your life, you're finding it. And maybe, just maybe, the death of who you thought you were is not an ending at all, but the greatest beginning you will ever know. If this resonates with you, don't run from it. Stay. Trust it. Because on the other side of ego death is not nothing, it is everything. When the ego finally dissolves, you discover something astonishing. You were never the one who died. The false roles, the masks, the fragile stories, they vanish, yes. But beneath them, something timeless remains, untouched by every storm you've ever faced. What's left is not nothingness, it's presence. Pure, steady, unshakable presence. Think of the sky after a violent storm. The thunder fades, the clouds break apart, and suddenly the vastness stretches endlessly above you. The storm never destroyed the sky, it only covered it for a while. That is what you realize when ego death has run its course. The storm was never you, the vastness was. In this state, fear loses its grip. Fear of rejection, failure, weakness, even death itself, all of it belongs to the ego. Your soul doesn't fear rejection because it knows it cannot be diminished. It doesn't fear failure because it sees every attempt as part of the unfolding. It doesn't fear endings because it knows it is eternal. When the ego dies, fear dies with it, and what remains is freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from achievement, approval, or control, but from simply being. But let's be honest, reaching this point is not easy. Most people never stay in the void long enough to see it. They rebuild, they cling, they create new masks because the silence feels unbearable. True ego death requires courage. The courage to stand in the emptiness without rushing to escape. The courage to let every false identity fall away until only truth is left. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop trying to become someone, you finally realize you already are. Not a role, not a title, not a story, just awareness itself, alive in this moment. The more the ego dissolves, the more life itself shines through you. Relationships feel lighter, work feels freer, and even the simplest act, breathing, walking, watching the sky, becomes sacred. So if you feel like you're losing yourself right now, remember this: what's dying isn't you. What's dying is everything you never were. The ground may feel like it's crumbling, but what's actually happening is the floor of illusion giving way to the foundation of truth. You're not losing your life, you're finding it. And maybe, just maybe, the death of who you thought you were is not an ending at all, but the greatest beginning you will ever know.
If this message resonates with you, share your experience in the comments, subscribe, and join me in the next video where I'll reveal how to live from this freedom in your everyday life.